There's a special kind of loneliness that comes when your own family turns their back on you. For Walter Griggs, 76 years old, that pain became his daily reality when his son dropped him at a rundown motel and never came back. The Pineview Motor Lodge was falling apart, just like Walter's hope. He spent his days in silence, wondering if anyone would ever remember he existed. Then one morning, everything changed. A crack in the wall of room 12 caught his attention. Behind it was a hidden door no one had opened in decades. What Walter found inside that secret room would turn his forgotten life into something no one could ignore. Could one abandoned old man bring down secrets an entire town buried years ago? Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe for tomorrow's story. The first morning at the Pineview Motor Lodge, Walter Griggs woke to the sound of silence. Not the peaceful kind that comes with a quiet Sunday morning, but the heavy, oppressive silence of abandonment. He lay on the sagging mattress in room 7, staring at water stains on the ceiling that looked like continents on some forgotten map, and tried to convince himself this was temporary. Kenny had said 2 weeks, maybe 3 at most. That was 6 days ago. Walter pushed himself upright, his joints protesting the movement. 76 years of living left their mark on body factory work. Long hours standing on concrete floors, the accumulated wear of simply existing. He reached for his medications on the nightstand, a daily ritual that had become more complicated since Margaret passed 3 years ago. She used to set them out for him, make sure he took them with food, remind him about the blood pressure pills that couldn't be taken with the cholesterol medication. Now he managed alone. The room smelled of mildew and old cigarette smoke, though the no smoking sign on the door had probably been there since the 1980s. Walter walked to the window and pulled back curtains that crumbled slightly at his touch. Outside, Highway 47 stretched empty in both directions. A 2-lane road that used to matter back when people drove through towns instead of around them on interstates. Across the highway sat Phyllis Crane's gas station, the only other business still operating within sight. Everything else, the diner, the farm supply store, the little grocery, had closed years ago, leaving behind sun-bleached signs and broken windows. Walter dressed slowly, carefully. Navy blue pants, a button-down shirt Margaret had bought him for his 75th birthday. He'd always taken pride in his appearance, even when he was working at the factory. A man should look put together, his father used to say. Shows respect for yourself and others. He picked up his phone, a simple flip model Kenny had gotten him 2 years ago, and tried his son's number again. Straight to voicemail. The generic recording, not even Kenny's voice anymore. Kenny, it's your father. Again, I'd appreciate a call back. Need to know what the plan is here. He kept his voice steady, professional. Didn't want to sound desperate, even though that's exactly what he was becoming. Walter had been a foreman at Bridgemont Manufacturing for 33 years. He understood systems, procedures, the importance of following through on commitments. You said you'd do something, you did it. That's how he'd been raised. How he'd raised Kenny, or tried to. Anyway, the argument had started over the house. Walter's house, the 3-bedroom ranch he and Margaret had bought in 1972. Where they'd raised Kenny, where Margaret had died in the bedroom they'd shared for 47 years. After the funeral, after a decent interval of grief, Kenny had suggested selling it. It's too big for you, Dad. Too many memories. And honestly, the market's good right now. You could get a nice apartment, something easier to maintain. Walter had refused. That house was Margaret. Her garden, her kitchen, her reading chair by the window. Selling it felt like erasing her. But then the property taxes came due, and the roof needed work, and the furnace died in January. Walter's Social Security covered the basics, but not major repairs. His savings, never substantial, had been depleted by Margaret's final medical bills, the ones insurance didn't cover, the experimental treatments they'd tried in desperation. Kenny had offered to help. Let me handle it, Dad. I've got some business opportunities. Things are really turning around for me. What Kenny had were gambling debts and a desperate need for money. Walter hadn't known that then. He'd signed the papers Kenny brought, trusted his son to arrange the house sale, to find him a nice place while everything was sorted out. Instead, Kenny had brought him here. Just temporary dad, 2-3 weeks tops. I've got a lead on a great assisted living place, but there's a waiting list. This'll give us time to get everything arranged. The Pineview Motor Lodge hadn't been operational in at least a decade, maybe longer. Weeds pushed through cracks in the parking lot. The neon sign vacancy and red letters hung dark and broken. Paint peeled from every surface. But the room had a bed, a bathroom that mostly worked, and Kenny had left him $200 in cash for food and whatever you need. I'll be back Friday. Friday had come and gone. Walter made his way to the motel office, though calling it an office was generous. The front desk sat covered in dust, old registration cards still in their slots behind the counter. A calendar from 1998 hung on the wall. The whole building felt frozen in time, like whoever ran it had simply walked away one day and never returned. He'd explored the property that first week, more out of boredom than curiosity. 12 rooms total, arranged in an L shape. All empty, all deteriorating at different rates. Some had broken windows. Others were inexplicably pristine, as if guests had checked out yesterday and housekeeping hadn't arrived yet. Room 12 had been the strangest. Everything intact, bed made, towels folded, television from the 1970s sitting on the dresser, but something felt off about it. Walter couldn't articulate what, exactly. Just a feeling, the kind you get when you know you're not alone, even though you can't see anyone. By the second week, Walter had established a routine. Wake at 6, take his medications, walk across the highway to Phyllis's gas station for coffee and whatever food she kept, usually day-old, sandwiches from the distributor, chips, fruit that was slightly past prime but still edible. Phyllis was somewhere in her 70s, thin as a rail, with white hair she kept in a practical shortcut. She'd run the gas station for as long as anyone could remember, or so she told Walter during their first conversation. "You're the fellow staying at the Pineview," she'd said, not a question. In a town this small, everyone knew everyone's business. Temporarily, Walter had replied, clinging to that word like a life raft. Phyllis had given him a long look, something sad and knowing in her eyes. "That place has been empty since before you can imagine. How do you end up there?" "My son arranged it, while we're sorting some things out." She'd nodded slowly, rung up his coffee and sandwich without comment. But after that first day, she'd started keeping better food in stock. Fresh bread, real coffee instead of just the prepackaged kind, fruit that didn't have bruises. "Get more deliveries anyway," she'd said when Walter commented on it. Might as well order decent stuff. But they both knew she was doing it for him. By the third week, Walter's anger at Kenny had begun shifting into something worse: acceptance. His son wasn't coming back. Whatever Kenny had planned, whatever had happened with the house sale, Walter had been deemed expendable. A problem solved by leaving it at an abandoned motel and walking away. The realization hurt worse than the anger had. Anger was clean, righteous. This was just sad. Walter had tried calling other family. A cousin in Ohio who hadn't returned his message. An old friend from the factory who'd moved to Florida. No one seemed to know what to say to a 76-year-old man who'd been abandoned by his only child. His savings were down to $800. Social Security would come the first of next month, but that was 3 weeks away. He was rationing his medications, taking them every other day instead of daily, hoping his body wouldn't notice. At night, lying on the sagging mattress, Walter thought about Margaret. How disappointed she'd be in Kenny. How worried she'd be about Walter. She'd always been the bridge between them, smoothing over the rough patches, finding common ground. Without her, they'd simply drifted apart. "I don't know what to do, Maggie," he'd whisper into the darkness. "I don't know how this happened." But deep down, he did know. He'd failed somehow. As a father, as a man, you don't end up abandoned at 76 if you've done everything right. The fourth week brought rain. Steady, relentless, the kind that found every weakness in the motel's aging structure. Water dripped through ceiling tiles, pooled in corners. The whole building smelled of wet rot and decay. Walter had started noticing things about the Pineview during those long, empty days. The way certain rooms were locked while others stood open. The odd layout of the office, with a door behind the desk that led nowhere or seemed to, anyway. He'd tried it once and found it sealed, painted over so many times the handle barely turned. And room 12, always room 12, with its unsettling perfection and that feeling of wrongness he couldn't shake. On the morning, everything changed. Walter was doing his routine inspection of rain damage. Phyllis had mentioned a bad leak in one of the rooms, suggested he might want to check it before the ceiling came down. He'd found the leak in room 12, water streaming down the wall behind the headboard, the wallpaper bubbling and peeling. That's when he noticed the draft. 3 months had passed since Kenny left Walter at the Pineview Motor Lodge. 3 months of waiting for phone calls that never came, of pretending this was temporary when every day made it more permanent. Walter had stopped calling his son. Pride, maybe, or just exhaustion at hearing the same voicemail recording over and over. The rain had been falling for 2 days straight when Walter noticed something wrong with room 12. He'd been avoiding that room, uncomfortable with the strange preservation of it. But water was coming through the ceiling now, and he couldn't ignore structural damage, even to a building he didn't own. He pushed open the door and was hit immediately by the smell of wet plaster and mold. The ceiling bulged ominously in one corner, dripping steadily onto the faded carpet. But it was the wall behind the bed that caught his attention. The wallpaper was peeling away in long strips, curling back to reveal older layers underneath. Walter approached slowly, his hand reaching out to touch the damaged wall. The paper came away easily in his fingers, decades-old paste turning to dust. Beneath it was another pattern, and beneath that another, like archaeological layers of the motel's history. And then he felt it a draft, cold air seeping through a crack in the plaster. He pressed his palm flat against the wall and felt the air moving. Behind this wall was space, emptiness where there shouldn't be any. Walter stepped back and studied the room's dimensions, then walked outside and counted the exterior walls. The math didn't work. Room 12 was shorter than it should be by at least 8 feet. There was something behind this wall. Walter's heart hammered in his chest, that old pump working harder than it had in months. He thought of Margaret, how she'd always encouraged his curiosity, his need to understand how things worked. "That's why you were such a good foreman," she'd say. "You notice what others miss." He went to the maintenance closet he discovered in his first week, a small room off the office, filled with ancient tools and supplies. He found a hammer, a screwdriver, a pry bar that had seen better days. His hands shook slightly as he carried them back to room 12. The arthritis in his fingers made the work slow and painful. He started at the crack where the draft came through, working the screwdriver under the plaster, prying gently. Chunks fell away, revealing wooden slats underneath, and behind those slats darkness. It took him 40 minutes to create an opening large enough to see through. Walter pulled out his phone, turned on the flashlight function Kenny had shown him once, and peered into the gap. A doorway. He was looking at the back of a door, painted the same institutional beige as the room's walls. The frame had been sealed with plaster and wallpaper, hidden so completely that you'd never know it was there unless you were looking for it. Walter's breathing came faster now. Someone had deliberately concealed this door. The question was why. He worked for another hour, his shoulders aching, fingers cramping, but driven by something he hadn't felt in months' purpose. The plaster kept falling away, And eventually he'd exposed enough of the door frame to find the edge, the seam where door met wall. The lock was old, probably original to the building. Walter studied it, then returned to the maintenance closet and searched through drawers of accumulated junk until he found a ring of keys, tags hanging from each one with faded room numbers. None were labeled for room 12, but one key had no label at all, just a worn brass tag with the letter M scratched into it. Walter returned to room 12, fitted the key into the exposed lock, and turned. The mechanism resisted, decades of disuse making it stubborn, but finally something clicked. He pushed, and the door swung inward with a groan of protesting hinges. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of dust and stale time. Walter shone his light through the opening and saw stairs, descending into darkness. His rational mind said this was foolish. He was 76 years old, with a bad heart and worse knees. He should call someone, the police maybe, or at least Phyllis. But who would care about an old man finding a hidden room in an abandoned motel? And what would he even tell them? That he'd found stairs? No, he needed to see this through himself. Walter descended carefully, one hand on the railing, the other holding his phone for light. 12 steps down, then a landing. Then the space opened into a room. He swept the light around and caught his breath. It was an apartment. Small, maybe 400 square feet, but fully furnished and seemingly untouched by time. A bed with the covers still turned down. A desk with papers scattered across its surface. A kitchenette with dishes in the drying rack. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes whose spines he couldn't read from here. Walter found a light switch by the door and flipped it, not expecting anything. But overhead fluorescent tubes flickered to life, buzzing and casting harsh light over everything. The apartment was from another era, 1970s, Walter guessed, based on the color scheme and furniture style. Burnt orange and harvest gold, dark wood paneling, shag carpet that had once been white but was now gray with dust. He walked to the desk, each step leaving prints in the dusty carpet. Papers lay scattered, bills, receipts, handwritten notes. In the center sat a framed photograph. A man in his 40s, stern-faced, standing in front of the Pineview Motor Lodge when it was still operational. The neon sign glowed behind him. Cars filled the parking lot. Walter picked up the frame and blew dust from the glass. At the bottom of the photo, written in marker, were the words, Harold Buckley, manager, 1968. A nameplate on the desk confirmed it. Harold Buckley, manager. So this was the manager's private apartment, hidden beneath room 12. But why hidden? And why abandoned with everything still in place, as if Buckley had just stepped out for a moment and never returned? Walter opened the desk drawers, his foreman's instinct for systematic investigation taking over. The top drawer held pens, rubber bands, the usual office detritus. The second drawer held files, guest registration copies, supply orders, maintenance logs. The bottom drawer was locked. Walter tried the key ring from the maintenance closet, working through each one until he found another unmarked key that turned the lock. The drawer slid open to reveal a leather-bound journal, the kind with a strap and clasp. He lifted it carefully, set it on the desk, and opened to the first page. January 1st, 1968. First day as manager of the Pineview Motor Lodge. New year, new position, new opportunities. This journal will record the daily operations and my observations. Harold Buckley. Walter turned pages, scanning entries. The early ones were mundane guest counts, maintenance issues, weather observations. But as he moved through the months, the tone began to shift. March 15th, 1968. Strange request today. Guest in room 7 wanted no record of his stay. Paid cash. Wouldn't sign the register. Said it was a private matter. I accommodated, though it felt wrong. June 3rd, 1968. Another private guest. This is becoming a pattern. They always pay well. Always request the same thing, no records, no questions. Starting to wonder what I've gotten myself into. September 22nd, 1968. Met with Sheriff Merrick today. He suggested the Pineview could be useful for certain situations that require discretion. Said there would be compensation. I should have said no. Walter's hands trembled as he turned more pages. The entries grew darker, more cryptic. References to arrangements and special guests and payments that didn't appear in the official books. In the corner of the room, Walter noticed something else, a safe. Small and old-fashioned, built into the wall behind a loose panel. He had found something. He didn't know exactly what yet, but every instinct told him it was important. This hidden apartment, this journal, they were pieces of something larger, something that had been deliberately concealed. Walter looked around the frozen-in-time space and felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 months, a reason to keep going. Walter spent the next 3 days in Harold Buckley's hidden apartment, returning each morning after a restless night in room 7. He approached the investigation methodically, the way he used to approach quality control problems at the factory, systematically, documenting everything, looking for patterns. The journal became his primary focus. He read it cover to cover twice, taking notes on his own pad of paper, creating a timeline of events. What emerged was a picture of a man who'd started with good intentions and gradually been pulled into something corrupt. Harold Buckley had been 39 years old when he became manager of the Pineview Motor Lodge in 1968. He'd been excited about the opportunity, proud to run his own establishment. The early entries reflected optimism and attention to detail. But within months, the tone shifted. Local officials began using the motel for purposes that required discretion. Sheriff Clayton Merrick appeared frequently in the entries, always requesting special accommodations for certain guests, no names in the register, no questions asked, cash payments that went into Buckley's pocket rather than the motel's accounts. Walter found the first mention of serious wrongdoing in an entry from November 1969. Situation in room 4 tonight. Guest was involved in an accident, hit someone with his car. Merrick says it needs to go away quietly. The guest is someone important, can't have a scandal. I helped clean the car. God forgive me. I helped clean blood off a car and said nothing. The entry ended there, but Walter could feel Buckley's anguish in the handwriting, the way the pen had pressed harder into the paper. As he continued reading, a pattern emerged. The Pineview had become a way station for covering up crimes affairs, assaults, business deals that couldn't see daylight. And Harold Buckley, whether through greed or fear or simple inability to extract himself, had become complicit. By 1972, the entry showed a man consumed by guilt and fear. I know too much. They know I know. Can't sleep anymore. Every car that pulls in, I wonder if they're coming for me. Walter set down the journal and rubbed his tired eyes. The fluorescent lights gave him headaches, but he couldn't stop reading. This was someone's life, someone's descent into moral compromise, documented in careful handwriting that grew shakier as the years progressed. He turned his attention to the filing cabinets he'd noticed on his first visit. Using the key ring, he opened the first drawer and found it meticulously organized folders labeled by year, each containing receipts, registration cards, and handwritten notes. But these weren't the official motel records. These were Buckley's private files, documenting the activities he couldn't record in the main ledgers. Walter pulled out the folder marked 1970 and found registration cards filled out in Buckley's handwriting. Guest names, but with asterisks beside them. Notes in the margins: Sheriff M. Guest, Judge W. Situation, County Commissioner R. Arrangement. Each card documented cash payments far exceeding normal room rates. $300 for a single night. $500. Once, $1,000 for what was listed as a weekend consultation. Walter's factory training kicked in. He created a spreadsheet on paper, listing dates, amounts, and the cryptic notes Buckley had made. A picture began to form, a systematic pattern of corruption involving local law enforcement, judges, county officials, and business leaders. The physical toll of his investigation was mounting. Walter's arthritis flared from hours of writing and sorting papers. His back ached from bending over files. He'd been skipping meals, too absorbed to walk across the highway to Phyllis's gas station. On the fourth day, Phyllis came to him. Walter was so deep in reading a folder of 1973 documents that he didn't hear her knock. She found him in the hidden apartment, papers spread across the floor in organized piles, the journal open on the desk. "Walter Griggs, you look like death warmed over," she said from the doorway, making him jump. "I haven't seen you in 3 days. Thought you might have passed on, so I came to check." Walter stood slowly, his knees protesting. "Phyllis, I'm sorry. I should have. How did you get in?" The motel door was open. I called out, saw the hole in the wall of room 12, and followed the light. She looked around the apartment, her expression unreadable. "So you found Harold's place." The words hit Walter like cold water. "You knew about this?" Phyllis stepped fully into the room, her eyes scanning the walls, the desk, landing on the photograph of Harold Buckley. Her face softened with an old sadness. "I knew Harold had a private apartment somewhere in the motel. Never knew exactly where. He was careful about that." She walked to the desk and picked up the photograph, her fingers trembling slightly. "He was a good man, Walter. He really was, in the beginning. You knew him. I knew him." Phyllis set down the photograph and turned to face Walter. "We were together, Harold and I, for 6 years. This was going to be our future. He'd run the motel. I'd run the gas station. We were going to get married once he got established." Walter sank into the desk chair, suddenly exhausted. "What happened?" "He got involved with the wrong people. Sheriff Merrick and his crowd. They used this place for things that shouldn't have happened. Harold tried to say no at first, but they had ways of making it difficult. Threats, promises, money when things were tight." Phyllis's voice was steady, but her eyes were distant. By the time he realized how deep he was, there was no getting out. "The journal stops in 1974, Walter said quietly. "What happened to him?" Phyllis was quiet for a long moment. "He disappeared. March of 1974. Said he was going to the state capitol, going to tell someone in authority what had been happening. I begged him not to, told him it was too dangerous. He went anyway." She looked at Walter. "Never came back. His car was found abandoned at the county line. No body, no trace. Official ruling was voluntary disappearance." "You think they killed him?" "I know they killed him," Phyllis said simply. "I've known it for 50 years. But knowing and proving are different things." Walter gestured at the papers surrounding them. "He documented everything. All of it. Names, dates, amounts. This is evidence. Evidence that's 50 years old, involving people who were powerful then and whose families are still powerful now." Phyllis shook her head. "What are you planning to do with this, Walter?" He didn't have an answer. He'd been so focused on uncovering the truth that he hadn't thought beyond the discovery itself. What was he planning to do? He was a 76-year-old man abandoned at a motel, with no resources, no credibility, no platform. But as he looked around at Harold Buckley's frozen-in-time apartment, at the evidence of corruption carefully preserved, he felt something crystallize inside him. Purpose. Maybe even duty. "I'm going to finish what he started," Walter said. "I'm going to make sure people know the truth." Phyllis studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then you'd better be prepared for what comes next. Because the truth has a way of making powerful people very uncomfortable." Walter woke the next morning with renewed determination. Phyllis's revelation had changed everything. This wasn't just historical curiosity anymore. Harold Buckley had been murdered for trying to expose the truth. The least Walter could do was honor that sacrifice by completing the task. He returned to the hidden apartment with fresh coffee Phyllis had brought him and a clearer mind. Today he would search more thoroughly, look for what he might have missed in his initial excitement. The filing cabinets yielded more secrets. In the back of the second drawer, wedged behind hanging folders, Walter found a metal box. Inside was a key ring with small numbered tags attached to each key numbers corresponding to the filing cabinet drawers. Walter systematically unlocked each drawer, finding layers of documentation Buckley had organized with meticulous care. Folders labeled by year, subdivided by type of incident. The man had essentially created an archive of corruption spanning a decade. One folder contained photographs, not the kind you'd find in a family album. These were surveillance shots, grainy and taken from a distance. Men shaking hands in the motel parking lot. Envelopes being passed. A few showed the interiors of rooms, apparently taken through doorways or windows. Walter spread the photographs on the desk, studying faces. Some were clearly dated by the clothing and hairstyles, late 1960s, early 1970s. He recognized none of the people, but Buckley had labeled the backs. Sheriff M. and Judge Whitmore. August 1970. Commissioner R. receiving payment. January 1972. Documentation of payoffs, plain as day. Another folder contained what appeared to be copies of official documents, police reports that had been altered, accident investigations that reached improbable conclusions, property transfers that didn't make sense. Buckley had somehow obtained originals or copies of these documents and preserved them. The most damning folder was simply labeled Incidents. Inside, Buckley had compiled detailed accounts of crimes that had been covered up. The hit and run from 1969 that Walter had read about in the journal. A domestic violence case involving a county official that had been buried. Evidence tampering in a burglary investigation. And then, dated September 1972, a single page with just a few lines. Man brought to room 9, already dead. Told to help dispose of body. Couldn't refuse, they made that clear. God help me. I helped bury someone in the woods behind the motel. Don't know his name. Don't know what he did. Only know I'm complicit in murder now. Walter's hand shook as he read those words. This was beyond corruption or cover-ups. This was homicide, and Buckley had been forced to participate. He searched through other files frantically, looking for more information about the September 1972 incident, but found nothing. Either Buckley had been too afraid to document more, or he kept that information somewhere else. Walter sat back, his mind racing. If Buckley had helped bury a body, and if the wrong people knew he could testify to that, then his disappearance in 1974 made terrible sense. They'd eliminated a witness who knew too much. A sound from upstairs made Walter freeze. Footsteps in room 12. Someone was in the motel. He moved quietly to the bottom of the stairs, listening. The footsteps were deliberate, moving around the room above. Then they stopped directly over the hidden apartment. Walter, you down there? Phyllis's voice. Thank God. Coming up, he called, relief flooding through him. He found Phyllis standing in room 12, holding a photograph in her hand. Not one from the apartment. This one was in a frame, and she'd clearly brought it with her. I thought you should see this, she said, handing it to him. The photograph showed a younger Phyllis, maybe in her 40s, standing beside Harold Buckley. They were in front of the Pineview, both smiling, his arm around her waist. She wore a simple dress, and he wore slacks and a button-down shirt. They looked happy, hopeful. That was taken in 1970, Phyllis said softly. Before everything went wrong. Before he got in so deep he couldn't see a way out. Walter looked at the picture, then at Phyllis. There's something I need to tell you, something I found. He led her down to the apartment and showed her the folder labeled Incidents, specifically the entry about September 1972. Phyllis read it, her face growing pale. "I didn't know about that," she whispered. "He never told me." God, he must have been terrified. Did he ever mention going to authorities? Before his disappearance, I mean. Phyllis nodded slowly. The last few months, he talked about it constantly. Said he couldn't live with himself anymore. He'd put together a package, all his evidence, all his documentation. Was going to mail it to the state attorney general. What happened to the package? I don't know. I assumed he'd mailed it before he disappeared, that maybe that's what got him killed. But if the attorney general had received it, there would have been an investigation. She looked at Walter. Unless the package never got sent. They searched the apartment together, going through every drawer, every cabinet, every possible hiding place. Nothing. If Buckley had prepared a package for the authorities, it wasn't here. Maybe he kept it somewhere else, Walter suggested. Somewhere safe. Or maybe they found it when they found him. Phyllis's voice was flat. Maybe that's why there was never any investigation. They destroyed the evidence along with the man. Walter pulled out the photograph he'd found earlier, the one showing men exchanging envelopes. On the back, in Buckley's handwriting, Sheriff Clayton Merrick, March 1973. Is Merrick still alive? He asked. Phyllis's expression hardened. Oh yes, he's alive. 89 years old, living in the Meadowbrook nursing home on the other side of town. Retired with full pension and benefits. Respected member of the community. People still call him Sheriff Merrick, like it's an honorary title. He got away with it, with all of it. They all did. The ones who didn't die of old age moved away, took their secrets with them. This county has a nice, clean reputation now. Nobody wants to dig up old scandals. Walter looked around the apartment at the files, the photographs, the evidence Buckley had so carefully preserved. What if someone did dig them up? What if someone made sure this story got told? Phyllis met his eyes. You're serious about this? I've got nothing else, Phyllis. My son abandoned me here. I've got no purpose, no future to speak of. But this, he gestured at the documents surrounding them. This matters. Harold matters. The truth matters. It could be dangerous. I'm 76 years old with a bad heart. How much danger can I really be in? Phyllis was quiet for a moment, then reached into her purse and pulled out an old envelope, yellowed with age. Harold gave this to me the week before he disappeared. Made me promise to keep it safe, not to open it unless something happened to him. You've had this for 50 years? I was too afraid to open it. Too afraid of what it might contain, what obligations it might create. She held the envelope out to Walter. But maybe it's time. Walter took the envelope, his hand steady despite the weight of the moment. The seal was still intact. The address written in Buckley's careful handwriting. Office of the State Attorney General, Springfield. Inside was a letter, 3 pages long, detailing everything. Names, dates, crimes, cover-ups. A complete confession of Buckley's involvement and a comprehensive accusation against everyone else. The evidence Walter needed. He never mailed it, Walter said quietly. He was going to. He told me he was driving to the state capitol that very night to deliver it personally. Didn't trust the mail. Phyllis's voice broke. But he came to see me first, to say goodbye. He knew it might be the last time. And he left this with me, just in case. Walter held the letter carefully. This was it, the key to everything. Buckley's final act, preserved through 5 decades by a woman who'd loved him enough to keep his secret safe. We need to finish this, Walter said. For Harold. For everyone they hurt. We need to make sure this truth comes out. Phyllis nodded, tears streaming down her weathered face. Then let's do it right. Let's make sure it counts. Walter spent the following week organizing everything Harold Buckley had left behind. He worked in the hidden apartment from dawn until his eyes grew too tired to read, carefully cataloging each piece of evidence, cross-referencing dates and names, building a comprehensive picture of the corruption that had infected this small town for over a decade. Phyllis visited daily, bringing food and supplies, sharing what she remembered from those years. Her memories filled in gaps. The documents couldn't context about who these people were, what power they wielded, how they'd maintained control for so long. On the 8th day, Walter made a discovery that changed everything. He'd been searching through the closet, which he'd initially dismissed as containing only old clothes and linens. But at the back, behind a stack of blankets, he found a cardboard box sealed with tape that had turned brown and brittle with age. Inside was a reel-to-reel tape recorder, the kind that had been common in the 1960s and 70s, and beside it, a dozen tapes in their original boxes, each labeled with dates spanning 1970 to 1974. Walter's heart raced as he examined the equipment. Would it still work after 50 years? He found an outlet, plugged it in, and was rewarded with a faint hum. The machine lived. He threaded the first tape carefully, following instructions he remembered from his youth when such equipment had been common. The tape was brittle, fragile, but it held together. Walter pressed play, static at first, then voices, scratchy and distant, but unmistakable. "Can't keep doing this, Clayton. Someone's going to talk." That was Buckley's voice. Walter recognized it somehow, though he'd never heard the man speak. Perhaps it was just the certainty that this had to be him, recorded in his own apartment. "Nobody's going to talk." The second voice was deeper, authoritative. "Because everybody's got skin in the game now. You included, Harold. You've taken the money same as everyone else. I'm talking about the Simmons situation." That went too far. The Simmons situation is handled. The man was going to expose everything, the gambling, the payments, all of it. He had to be dealt with. Dealt with? "You killed him, Clayton. You killed a man and made me help bury the body." A long pause. Then the authoritative voice again, colder now. "You helped because you're complicit. You've been complicit since the day you took the first payment. Now you keep your mouth shut and do what you're told, or you'll end up like Simmons." The tape continued, but Walter's hands were shaking so badly he had to stop it. This was Sheriff Clayton Merrick's voice, discussing murder openly, threatening Buckley. This was evidence, real, undeniable evidence. He played through more tapes, each one revealing conversations Buckley had secretly recorded. Discussions of payoffs, planning sessions for cover-ups, explicit threats. On one tape, Merrick and another man identified as Judge Whitmore discussed altering court records to protect the county commissioner's son from assault charges. The recordings were damning. More than damning, they were explosive. Walter carefully rewound each tape, labeling them with his own notes about their contents. His factory training served him well. He created an inventory system, matching tapes to documents, cross-referencing names and dates. But one problem loomed large. The tapes were old, fragile, and existed only in this obsolete format. If anything happened to them, the evidence would be lost. He needed copies, digital copies, that could be preserved and shared. That meant he needed help with technology he didn't understand. When Phyllis arrived that afternoon, Walter explained what he'd found. Her reaction was immediate and visceral. She pressed her hands to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. He recorded them. Harold recorded everything. Her voice was barely a whisper. He was building a case. A real case. "I need to digitize these," Walter said. "Make copies that won't degrade. But I don't know how to do that. Don't have the equipment." Phyllis wiped her eyes, nodding. "My nephew, Arnold. He's 53, lives over in Riverside. He works with computers, does audio restoration as a hobby. He could help. Can we trust him? He's family. And he never liked how the old families ran things around here. His father, my brother, lost his business back in the 80s because he wouldn't play ball with the county commissioners." She pulled out her phone. "Let me call him." 3 days later, Arnold Crane arrived at the Pineview Motor Lodge with equipment that looked impossibly complex to Walter. The man was thin and balding, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He didn't ask questions, just listened as Phyllis explained what they'd found and what they needed. "This is incredible," Arnold said, examining the tapes with careful hands. 50-year-old recordings in surprisingly good condition. The information on these, if it's what you say, this is historical dynamite. He set up his equipment in the hidden apartment, working with a precision that reminded Walter of his own factory days. Over the next several hours, Arnold transferred each tape to digital format, creating multiple copies on different devices. "For safety," he explained. "You don't want this existing in only one place. If someone wanted to destroy the evidence, they'd need to find every copy." As the recordings transferred, Arnold listened through headphones, his expression growing increasingly serious. When he finished, he removed the headphones and looked at Walter and Phyllis with something like awe. "You realize what this is, right? This isn't just local corruption. This is conspiracy, racketeering, murder for hire. The statute of limitations never runs out on murder." "Meaning what?" Walter asked. "Meaning if Sheriff Merrick is still alive, he could be prosecuted. Right now, today. This isn't ancient history. It's an active cold case waiting to be reopened." Walter felt something shift inside him. He'd been thinking of this as historical justice, setting the record straight about Harold Buckley. But Arnold was right. This was bigger. People had been murdered. Evidence had been destroyed. And one of the main perpetrators was still alive, still free, still respected in the community. "We need to go to the authorities," Walter said. Phyllis shook her head. "Local authorities? The sheriff's department that Merrick used to run? The county prosecutor whose father was probably involved in all this? Then state authorities. The attorney general's office, like Harold planned." Arnold nodded slowly. "That could work. But you need more than just the recordings. You need corroboration, context. These tapes are powerful, but a good defense attorney could argue they're fabricated or taken out of context. You need the full picture." Walter gestured around the apartment. "We have documents, photographs, Harold's journal, his letter. That's good. That's a start." Arnold pulled out a laptop and opened a document. "But here's what would make this case bulletproof: contemporary corroboration. Are there other people still alive who remember this? Witnesses who can confirm what the documents and tapes describe?" Phyllis spoke up quietly. "Eugene Watts. He was a reporter for the County Chronicle back then. He tried to investigate some of this. Got shut down by his editors. He's still alive, living over on Pine Street. Must be in his 80s now." "Perfect," Arnold said. "A journalist who tried to report on this at the time. That's exactly the kind of corroboration we need." Walter felt momentum building. They weren't just discovering the truth anymore. They were building a case. A real case that could actually lead to justice. "There's one more thing," Phyllis said softly. She pulled out the pocket watch she'd shown Walter earlier, the one engraved, "To Harold, with love, P." She held it out to him. "I want you to have this. Harold would have wanted someone to finish what he started. I think that someone is you." Walter took the watch, feeling its weight in his palm. It was more than a timepiece. It was a symbol of love, loss, and unfinished business. A reminder that some debts transcend death. "I'll make sure it counts," he promised. "I'll make sure Harold's sacrifice wasn't for nothing." Eugene Watts lived in a small house on the edge of town, the kind of place that spoke of a man who'd outlived most of his generation. The yard was tidy but minimal, the house paint fading but not yet peeling. A flag hung from the porch, and a weathered mailbox bore the name Watts in hand-painted letters. Walter knocked, Phyllis standing beside him for moral support. They'd called ahead, explained they wanted to discuss the Pineview Motor Lodge and events from the 1970s. Eugene had agreed immediately. The man who answered the door was tall but stooped, his 82 years evident in the careful way he moved. But his eyes were sharp, alert, taking in his visitors with the assessing gaze of a lifelong journalist. "Phyllis Crane," he said, a smile crossing his weathered face. "Haven't seen you in years. And you must be Walter Griggs. Come in, please." His living room was lined with bookshelves, every available surface covered with newspapers, magazines, and stacks of notebooks, the accumulated archive of a man who'd spent his life chasing stories. "You mentioned the Pineview," Eugene said once they were seated. "That place has haunted me for 50 years. I tried to write about what was happening there, the corruption, the cover-ups. My editor killed every story. Said I didn't have enough proof, that I was risking libel suits the paper couldn't afford. What if I told you the proof exists?" Walter said, "What if Harold Buckley documented everything?" Eugene leaned forward, intensity replacing his casual manner. "I'd say show me." Walter had brought copies of key documents, not the originals, which stayed safely hidden, but photographs and printed pages that told the story. He laid them out on Eugene's coffee table, watching the old journalist's face as he examined each one. "My God," Eugene whispered. "He kept everything. Every single piece." He looked up at Phyllis. "Harold did this?" "He recorded them too," Phyllis said quietly. "Conversations with Merrick and the others. Explicit discussions of crimes, cover-ups, payments." Eugene sat back, his hands trembling slightly. "I knew something like this existed. Had to exist. Nobody ran an operation that clean without documentation, without insurance. I just never found it." "What can you tell us about Harold's disappearance?" Walter asked. Eugene stood and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner. He pulled out a folder, thick with papers, and brought it back to the couch. "I kept my own investigation going, even after my editor shut me down. Personal project, I told myself. Maybe someday the truth would matter." He opened the folder, revealing newspaper clippings, typed notes, photographs. Harold Buckley disappeared on March 14th, 1974. His car was found abandoned at the county line. The next morning, official investigation concluded voluntary disappearance. Said he'd probably run off with gambling debts or a woman. "That's nonsense," Phyllis said. "Harold didn't gamble, and he certainly didn't run off." "I know. I never believed the official story." Eugene pulled out a photograph showing a younger Merrick standing beside the abandoned car. "Notice who led the investigation. Sheriff Merrick himself. The man who probably ordered the killing was in charge of finding the killer. Classic fox guarding the henhouse." Walter studied the photograph. Merrick looked confident, almost smug, standing beside evidence of his own crime. "I tried to get the state police involved," Eugene continued. "Called them anonymously, suggested they look into the case. They declined, said local jurisdiction was handling it appropriately. That's when I knew how deep it went. State police were either complicit or too intimidated to act." "What about the newspaper?" Walter asked. "Could you publish now what you couldn't then?" Eugene shook his head slowly. "The County Chronicle isn't what it was. New ownership, smaller staff. They're barely hanging on in the internet age. But there's someone who might listen, Lorraine Webb. She's the current editor. Took over about 5 years ago. She's not from around here. Doesn't have the old loyalties. I've mentioned the Pineview story to her before. Told her there was something there. She said if I ever got proof, she'd run it. Even if it implicated prominent families." Phyllis asked. "Loren's a real journalist. Old school. If the story's true and we can back it up, she printed." Eugene looked at the documents spread before him. "And this backs it up. This is everything we need." Walter felt something shift. They'd been gathering evidence, but now they had a path forward, a way to make the truth public. But even as hope rose, caution tempered it. If we go public, there will be consequences, he said. For all of us. These families still have power. I'm 82 years old, Eugene said firmly. I've been waiting 50 years to tell this story. What can they do to me now that age hasn't already done? Phyllis nodded. I'm not far behind you. I've lived with this secret my entire adult life. It's time. Walter thought of Kenny, of the abandonment that had brought him to the Pineview, of the purposeless months he'd spent feeling forgotten and useless. Then he thought of Harold Buckley, a man who tried to do the right thing and paid with his life. The choice was obvious. Then we move forward, he said. We tell the story. Eugene reached into the folder and pulled out more papers. These are drafts of articles I wrote back then, the ones my editor wouldn't publish. Names, dates, connections. I documented everything I learned, even if I couldn't print it. Consider it my contribution to Harold's evidence. He handed the papers to Walter, dozens of typed pages, yellowed with age, representing decades of frustrated journalism, research that had never seen publication, investigations that had been silenced, a career defined by the story he couldn't tell. There's something else, Eugene said, his voice dropping. 2 weeks after Harold disappeared, I received an anonymous phone call. Man's voice, disguised somehow. He told me to stop asking questions about the Pineview. Said people who didn't know when to quit ended up like Buckley. I backed off after that. Ashamed to say it, but I did. I had a wife, kids. I convinced myself some stories weren't worth dying for. No one blames you for that, Phyllis said gently. I blame myself. I've blamed myself for 50 years. Eugene looked at Walter. That's why I'm helping you now. This is my chance to make it right, to be the journalist I should have been back then. Walter felt the weight of the moment. 3 elderly people sitting in a living room, holding evidence of crimes committed half a century ago, preparing to challenge powerful families and reopen wounds the town had tried to forget. It should have felt foolish, quixotic. Instead, it felt necessary. We need to meet with Lorraine Webb, Walter said. Show her everything. See if she'll commit to publishing. Eugene picked up his phone. I'll call her now. Lorraine respects deadlines and old journalists. She'll make time for us. As Eugene dialed, Walter looked at Phyllis. She gave him a small, sad smile, her hand unconsciously touching the spot where Harold's pocket watch now rested in Walter's pocket. They were doing this for Harold, for justice, for the truth. But Walter knew he was also doing it for himself. This investigation had given him something he'd lost: purpose, dignity, a reason to keep going. Whatever came next, he'd found meaning in his final years. That alone was worth whatever price they might pay. She'll see us tomorrow morning, Eugene said, hanging up the phone. 10 o'clock at the newspaper office. She sounded very interested when I mentioned new evidence in a 50-year-old cold case. Walter nodded, feeling determination settle in his bones. Tomorrow they would take the next step. Tomorrow they would begin to finish what Harold Buckley had started. Lorraine Webb's office at the County Chronicle was cluttered with the organized chaos of active journalism, stacks of papers, bulletin boards covered with story notes, a wall of filing cabinets that had seen better days. She was in her mid-50s, with steel gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and glasses that hung from a chain around her neck. Eugene has been telling me about the Pineview for years, she said, gesturing for them to sit. Always said there was a story there, but never had proof. What's changed? Walter began laying out the evidence methodically. The journal entries, the photographs, the financial records. He saved the recordings for last, playing selected excerpts of Merrick discussing crimes and cover-ups. Lorraine listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious with each revelation. This is extraordinary, she said finally. This is Pulitzer-level investigative journalism, except the investigation was done 50 years ago by a motel manager who paid for it with his life. Can you publish it? Phyllis asked. Can I? Yes. Will the paper's lawyers let me? That's another question. Lorraine leaned back in a chair. We're talking about accusing prominent families of serious crimes, murder, corruption, conspiracy. Even with this evidence, there are legal risks. What if we went beyond just publishing? Eugene suggested. What if we involved law enforcement simultaneously? Give them the evidence, let them open an official investigation, then publish alongside that? Lorraine nodded slowly. That would provide cover. We're not making accusations. We're reporting on an active investigation. She looked at Walter. But that means going to the authorities. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny? Before Walter could answer, Lorraine's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, frowned, and answered. Webb. Her expression changed as she listened, going from curious to shocked. When? Are you certain? A pause. Yes, I'll look into it. Thank you. She hung up and looked at the three of them with an odd expression. That was my contact at the county clerk's office. I'd asked her to pull any records related to Harold Buckley, just to verify dates for our story. Lorraine picked up her glasses, put them on. She found something. A death certificate. The room went silent. Phyllis's face drained of color. That's impossible, she whispered. Harold's death was never confirmed. He was listed as a voluntary disappearance. According to this, Harold Buckley died on March 15th, 1974, the day after he disappeared. Lorraine was reading from her computer screen now. Cause of death listed as accidental drowning. Body found in the Clearwater River, 30 miles downstream from here. Identified by wallet contents and partial fingerprints. Walter felt something cold settle in his stomach. Why wasn't this connected to the missing person report? Because the death certificate was filed in Riverside County, not here. Different jurisdiction. The body was found on their side of the river, so their coroner handled it. Lorraine kept scrolling. The coroner who signed the certificate was Dr. Vernon Hayes. Eugene made a sound of disgust. Hayes was on Merrick's payroll. I could never prove it, but everyone knew. He'd sign whatever death certificates they needed. So they killed Harold, dumped his body in another county, and had a friendly coroner rule it accidental. Phyllis's voice was steady, but tears streamed down her face. I knew he was dead. I've known it for 50 years. But having proof, Walter reached over and took her hand. She gripped it tightly, her whole body trembling. There's more, Lorraine said quietly. According to the records, Buckley had a life insurance policy. The beneficiary was listed as Phyllis Crane. Phyllis looked up sharply. I never received anything. The policy was never paid out. Because the insurance company never connected the death certificate to Harold Buckley. They had him listed as missing, not deceased. Without proof of death, they couldn't or wouldn't pay. Lorraine pulled up another screen. The policy is still technically active. With 50 years of interest, it would be worth. She paused, calculating. Approximately $200,000. The number hung in the air. Phyllis made a small, choked sound. He took out the policy for me, in case something happened to him. I never knew all these years, never knew. This changes everything, Eugene said. This isn't just corruption. It's premeditated murder with a coordinated cover-up across multiple jurisdictions. This is federal territory conspiracy, obstruction of justice. Walter's mind was racing. Harold hadn't just disappeared. He'd been murdered. And the killing had been sophisticated enough to involve multiple counties and corrupt officials. This spoke to organization, planning, resources. There's something else we need to consider, he said slowly. If they went to this much trouble to cover up Harold's death, what were they really protecting? It can't have just been the corruption at the Pineview. That's serious, but not serious enough to justify murder and this level of cover-up. Lorraine was nodding. You're right. There's something bigger here. something we haven't found yet. Walter thought back to Harold's journal, to the entry about September 1972. The man who'd been brought to room 9, already dead. Harold had been forced to help bury him. Harold witnessed another murder, Walter said. Or at least knew about one. September 1972. Someone named Simmons. That's what Merrick called him on one of the tapes. Harold wrote that he'd been forced to help dispose of a body. Eugene went very still. Simmons. Gerald Simmons. I remember him. He was a county auditor. Discovered some irregularities in public works contracts. Said he was going to report it to the state. Then he disappeared. His wife reported him missing, but the investigation went nowhere. But because Merrick was running the investigation, Lorraine said, understanding dawning. Just like with Harold. And if Harold knew about Simmons, could testify to his murder, Walter continued. Then Harold had to be eliminated, Eugene finished. They killed Simmons to protect the corruption. Then they killed Harold to protect themselves from the Simmons murder. The full scope was becoming clear. This wasn't just a story about a corrupt motel and local officials taking bribes. This was a criminal conspiracy that had lasted years, involved multiple murders, and reached into state-level cover-ups. We need the FBI, Lorraine said flatly. This is beyond local law enforcement, beyond even state police. We need federal investigators who have no connection to this county or its old power structures. Walter pulled out Harold's letter, the one he'd never mailed, and handed it to Lorraine. Harold was going to send this to the state attorney general. He detailed everything, the corruption, the murders, all of it. But he never got the chance. Lorraine read the letter, her expression growing more grim with each paragraph. This is a confession and an accusation. It's compelling, but it's also 50 years old. We need more. What about the insurance policy? Phyllis asked quietly. If the insurance company has records, if we can prove Harold took out a policy specifically because he feared for his life, that shows consciousness of danger, Eugene said. It's circumstantial, but it helps establish the threat he faced. Walter looked around at his unlikely team, an elderly woman who'd lost her love, a frustrated journalist who'd carried guilt for decades, and a newspaper editor willing to risk everything for the truth. And himself, an abandoned old man who'd stumbled into a 50-year-old conspiracy. So we take everything to the FBI, he said. The documents, the recordings, Harold's letter, the death certificate, all of it. We lay it out and let them decide if there's enough for an investigation. And I publish the story regardless, Lorraine added. Whether the FBI acts or not, this needs to be public. People need to know what happened here. Phyllis was still crying quietly, but she nodded. For Harold. We do this for Harold. Walter felt the weight of Harold's pocket watch in his jacket. Time had passed, but justice didn't have an expiration date. Not for murder. Not for truth. Then let's finish what he started, Walter said. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Walter, Phyllis, Eugene, and Lorraine worked from the hidden apartment at the Pineview, transforming Harold Buckley's secret archive into a comprehensive case file that could withstand federal scrutiny. Arnold returned with additional equipment, creating multiple digital backups of every document, photograph, and recording. Redundancy is key, he explained, distributing encrypted flash drives to each of them. If something happens to one copy, we have others. Eugene drafted a timeline that spanned 1965 to 1974, connecting each piece of evidence to specific crimes and individuals. His journalist's mind organized the chaos into a coherent narrative that even someone unfamiliar with the case could follow. Lorraine worked her contacts, reaching out to the FBI field office in the state capital. She used her credentials as a newspaper editor to arrange a meeting, framing it as new evidence in multiple cold case homicides with potential federal jurisdiction. The appointment was set for Friday morning, 2 days away. But on Wednesday afternoon, Walter noticed something that made his blood run cold. A dark sedan parked across from the Pineview, engine running, windows tinted. The same car he'd seen yesterday. And the day before, he pointed it out to Phyllis. "We're being watched." She peered through the window, her face tightening. "I've seen that car near my gas station too. Different times of day, always at a distance." "Someone knows what we're doing," Eugene said quietly. "Or suspects, at least." Arnold looked worried. "Should we move the evidence? Hide it somewhere else?" "We've already made copies," Lorraine reminded them. "Walter has a set. I have a set. Eugene has one. Phyllis has one. Even if they found the originals, they can't stop us now." But Walter wasn't reassured. The appearance of surveillance meant their investigation had been noticed. Someone was paying attention, and that someone likely wasn't friendly. "We accelerate the timeline," he decided. "We don't wait until Friday. We go to the FBI tomorrow." Lorraine made the call, explained the urgency. The FBI agent, Special Agent Curtis Landry, agreed to move the meeting up. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock. That evening, Walter couldn't sleep. He lay in room 7, listening to the old building settle and creak, wondering if Harold had felt this same mixture of fear and determination in his final days. The pocket watch rested on a nightstand beside him, its ticking a steady reminder of time passing, of 50 years gone by, of justice delayed but not denied. At 3 in the morning, he heard a sound outside. Footsteps on gravel. Walter moved to the window, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain. The dark sedan was back, closer now, parked at the edge of the lot. As he watched, a figure emerged too far away and too dark to identify, and walked slowly around the perimeter of the motel. Walter's heart hammered. Were they looking for a way in? Trying to intimidate him? Or just confirming he was still here? The figure paused near room 12, seeming to study the building, then returned to the car and drove away. Walter didn't sleep the rest of the night. Morning came with cruel slowness. At 8 o'clock, Phyllis arrived with coffee and breakfast. She took one look at Walter's face and said, "You saw them too. Someone was here last night, checking the place out. Arnold's house was watched too. He called me this morning." Her voice was steady, but Walter could see the fear in her eyes. "We're not imagining this. Maybe we should involve local police," Walter suggested, though he didn't believe it himself. "And tell them what?" "That we're investigating crimes committed by the former sheriff, and we think we're being watched. They'd either laugh at us or warn whoever's watching." Phyllis set down her coffee. "We stick to the plan. We get to the FBI today, and after that, we're protected." Eugene and Arnold arrived at noon. They loaded everything into Eugene's car, the originals, the equipment, the compiled evidence. The plan was simple. Drive to the state capitol together, meet with the FBI, turn over everything, and let federal law enforcement handle it from there. Lorraine would follow in her own car. She wanted to be there for the handoff, to witness history and ensure she had the full story for her article. At 1 o'clock, they left the Pineview. Walter took one last look at room 12, at the hidden apartment beneath it, at the place that had changed his life. Whatever happened now, he'd done what he could. He'd honored Harold Buckley's memory and his sacrifice. The drive took 45 minutes. Walter sat in the back seat next to Phyllis, watching the countryside roll by, thinking about how different everything had been just 4 months ago. He'd been abandoned, purposeless, waiting to die. Now he was part of something that mattered, something bigger than himself. The FBI field office was an imposing concrete building downtown, all sharp angles and tinted windows. They parked in the visitor lot and gathered their materials. 3 boxes of documents, a laptop with the digital recordings, and Eugene's timeline. Special Agent Curtis Landry met them in the lobby. He was younger than Walter expected, maybe 50, with close-cropped hair and the alert, assessing eyes of someone trained to spot deception. With him was Assistant Agent Vanessa Cho, 30-ish, sharp, and professional. "Mr. Griggs? I'm Agent Landry. This is Agent Cho. Thank you for coming." They were escorted to a conference room, and Walter began his presentation. He'd prepared carefully, starting with how he'd found the hidden apartment, then systematically walking through each piece of evidence. Landry and Cho listened without interruption, their expressions neutral but attentive. When Walter played excerpts from the recordings, something shifted. Landry leaned forward, his neutrality replaced by intense focus. The tape of Merrick discussing the Simmons murder played in the quiet room, and Walter watched the agents exchange meaningful glances. "We've had our eye on this county for years," Landry admitted after the tape ended. "Rumors, suspicions, but never enough to open an investigation. Previous attempts to look into irregularities were met with stonewalling." He gestured at the evidence spread across the table. "This changes everything. This gives us probable cause for a full investigation into multiple homicides and a criminal conspiracy." "Clayton Merrick is still alive," Walter said. "He's 89, living in a nursing home. Could he be prosecuted?" "There's no statute of limitations on murder," Cho replied. "If the evidence supports it, yes, he could face charges." Landry stood and extended his hand to Walter. "Mr. Griggs, what you've done here is remarkable. You've potentially solved multiple cold cases and exposed a conspiracy that's been hidden for half a century. We'll need full statements from all of you, and the investigation will take time, but I want you to know we're taking this seriously." Walter shook his hand, feeling something like relief flood through him. They'd done it. They'd gotten the evidence to people who could act on it. Now came the hardest part, waiting to see if justice would finally be served. The FBI moved faster than Walter anticipated. Within a week, Agent Landry called with news that made his hands shake as he held the phone. "We've brought Clayton Merrick in for questioning," Landry said. "I wanted you to know before it hits the media. Loren's story publishes tomorrow." Walter sat down heavily on the bed in room 7. After 50 years, the wheels of justice were finally turning. Loren's article ran on the front page of the County Chronicle the next morning. "New evidence emerges in 50-year-old cold case murders," read the headline. She'd written it carefully, focusing on the facts, the discovery of Harold Buckley's hidden apartment, the documentation he'd preserved, the recordings that captured criminal conspiracy in real time. By afternoon, the story had been picked up by state media. By evening, national news outlets were calling the tale of an abandoned elderly man uncovering a decades-old murder. Conspiracy captured public imagination in a way none of them had anticipated. Walter's phone rang constantly, journalists requesting interviews, documentary filmmakers proposing projects, true crime podcasters wanting his story. He ignored most of them, focusing only on what mattered, the investigation. 2 weeks after their FBI meeting, Agent Landry called again. Merrick's attorney wants to make a deal. His client's willing to provide a full confession in exchange for consideration regarding sentencing. "He's admitting it?" Walter asked, barely believing. "Not yet officially, but his attorney knows the evidence against him is overwhelming. The recordings alone are damning, and we found corroborating evidence, bank records showing unexplained cash deposits, witness statements from people willing to talk now that we're involved. Merrick knows he's finished." 3 days later, Walter received permission to observe the interrogation through a one-way mirror. He sat in the small observation room with Phyllis, watching as guards brought Clayton Merrick into the interview room. The man was 89, but still carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to power. Tall, broad-shouldered despite his age, with steel gray hair and cold blue eyes. He wore an expensive suit. His attorney had dressed him well. Agent Landry sat across from him, a stack of folders on the table. "Mr. Merrick, thank you for agreeing to speak with us today." Merrick's attorney, a polished man in his 50s, leaned forward. My client is here in good faith, hoping to resolve this matter. Let's start with Harold Buckley, Landry said, opening the first folder. He slid a photograph across the table, the one of Merrick and Buckley in the Pineview parking lot. You knew him. I knew him. He managed the Pineview Motor Lodge. That wasn't a secret. Merrick's voice was gravelly but steady. Did you have a business relationship with Mr. Buckley? A pause. Merrick glanced at his attorney, who nodded slightly. We had an arrangement. The Pineview was useful for certain situations that required discretion. What kind of situations? People in public life sometimes need privacy. Affairs, business meetings that couldn't be public knowledge. The Pineview provided that. Landry placed another document on the table, a page from Buckley's ledger showing payments. These look like substantial sums for simple room rentals. Services rendered, Merrick said carefully. Including covering up crimes? Landry slid forward the transcript of a recording. This is from a tape Harold Buckley made in August 1973. That's you, isn't it, Sheriff Merrick, discussing payment to alter a police report? Walter watched Merrick's composure crack slightly. The man's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. I want to remind you, Landry continued, that we have hours of recordings, dozens of documents, witness statements. We know about the corruption, the payoffs, the cover-ups. What I need to understand is what happened to Harold Buckley and Gerald Simmons. The room went silent. Merrick stared at the table, his attorney whispering urgently in his ear. Finally, Merrick spoke. I want immunity from the death penalty. That's not mine to grant, Landry said. But if you provide truthful testimony about all crimes, including homicides, the prosecutor will consider it when deciding charges. Another whispered consultation with the attorney. Then Merrick nodded slowly. Harold Buckley was a liability. By early 1974, he was threatening to go to state authorities. Said he couldn't live with himself anymore. The people deserved to know the truth. Merrick's voice was flat, emotionless. We couldn't allow that. Too many people were implicated. Too much money involved. So you had him killed. I arranged it. 2 men I knew from the service did the actual work. Made it look like he'd left town voluntarily. Then they handled him and disposed of the body in Riverside County. I had a contact there, a coroner who filed the death certificate without asking questions. Phyllis gasped softly beside Walter, hearing the cold, clinical description of Harold's murder. It was one thing to know it intellectually, another to hear the killer describe it without remorse. And Gerald Simmons? Landry pressed. Simmons discovered irregularities in county contracts. He was going to report fraud, which would have exposed our whole operation. We brought him to the Pineview, persuaded him to reconsider. When he refused, Merrick paused. It had to be handled. You killed him. Not personally. But I gave the order. We buried him in the woods behind the motel. Buckley helped, though he didn't want to. After that, he was fully complicit. I thought that would keep him quiet, but it didn't. No, his conscience bothered him, made him dangerous. Merrick looked directly at the mirror, as if he could see Walter watching. I did what was necessary to protect people's interests. That's what law enforcement is. We protect and serve. You murdered 2 men and covered it up for 50 years, Landry said coldly. That's not law enforcement. That's organized crime. Merrick's attorney intervened. My client is cooperating fully. He's provided detailed information about serious crimes. We expect that to be considered. Landry gathered his papers. We'll continue this tomorrow. Agent Cho will take your formal statement. I advise you to be completely truthful. We'll verify everything you say. As guards led Merrick away, Walter sat back, feeling drained. He'd wanted to hear the truth, needed to hear it. But listening to Merrick describe Harold's murder with such cold detachment was harder than he'd anticipated. Phyllis was crying silently, and Walter took her hand. They'd gotten what they came for, a confession, proof, justice beginning to take shape. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like grief 50 years delayed. The confession made national news. Former sheriff admits to 1970s murders dominated headlines for days. Television crews descended on the small town, filming the Pineview Motor Lodge, interviewing longtime residents, exploring the history of corruption that had festered for decades. Walter became an unexpected media figure. The motel detective, they called him, though he hated the nickname. He wasn't a detective, just an old man who'd stumbled onto the truth and refused to let it stay buried. He agreed to a handful of interviews, always focusing on Harold Buckley rather than himself. "This is his story," Walter told reporters. "He's the one who documented everything, who tried to do the right thing. I just finished what he started." The publicity brought unexpected consequences. 3 days after Merrick's confession aired, Walter received a letter. The return address made his breath catch. Kenny Griggs. He opened it with trembling hands. "Dad," it began, "I saw you on the news. Saw what you've been doing these past months while I abandoned you. There's no excuse for what I did. I was desperate, drowning in gambling debts, and I made terrible choices. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd come back for you once I sorted things out. Then days became weeks, and shame kept me away. I couldn't face what I'd done. Seeing you now, seeing what you've accomplished, what you've survived, I'm so ashamed. You deserve better from me. You deserve better than the son I've been. I'm in counseling now, dealing with the gambling addiction, trying to get my life straight. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Dad. If you're willing, I'd like to talk." To try to explain, even though nothing can excuse what I did. "Your son, Kenny." Walter read the letter 3 times, emotions warring inside him. Anger at the abandonment, the months of uncertainty and fear. But also a faint glimmer of something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the possibility of it someday. He wrote back that evening, keeping his response brief. "Kenny, I received your letter. What you did hurt me deeply. I spent months believing I'd been completely forgotten, that my life had no value to anyone. That kind of abandonment leaves scars. But I also learned something these past months, that I'm stronger than I thought, that I can still matter, still make a difference. I don't know if we can rebuild what's been broken between us. Trust takes time to restore, and I'm not sure how much time I have left. But if you're serious about addressing your problems, about changing, then maybe we can try. Slowly. No promises, no guarantees. Just honest communication. That's all I can offer right now. Dad." He mailed it the next morning, unsure if he'd done the right thing, but knowing he needed to at least leave the door open. Margaret would have wanted that she'd always believed in second chances. Other news arrived the same week. Phyllis received notification from Harold's insurance company. After 50 years, the policy would finally pay out. With accumulated interest, the sum was substantial more money than Phyllis had seen in her lifetime. "I don't want it," she told Walter when she shared the news. "It's blood money. Harold died for this. Harold took out that policy to take care of you," Walter reminded her gently. "He wanted you protected if something happened to him. Accepting it honors his intent. Then I'll use it to honor his memory." Phyllis's voice strengthened. "I'm going to establish a fund for elderly people who've been abandoned or forgotten. People in situations like yours, Walter. People who need help and have nowhere to turn." The idea moved him deeply. From tragedy and loss, something good would emerge. Harold's sacrifice would help others, would create meaning beyond the pain. Eugene's article about the case won a state journalism award. At the ceremony, he dedicated it to Harold Buckley and all the stories that should have been told but weren't. Loren's coverage brought new recognition to the County Chronicle, reversing its declining fortunes and securing its future. A month after Merrick's confession, Walter received a call from Arnold. The county has agreed to designate the Pineview as a historical landmark. They want to preserve the building, create a small museum about the case. They're asking if you'd be willing to serve as historical consultant. Walter looked around room 7, the place that had been his home for months now. He'd expected to resent the Pineview, to see it only as the site of his abandonment. Instead, it had become the place where he'd found purpose. "I'd be honored," he said. The designation came with a modest salary and free residence. Walter would live at the Pineview permanently now, not as an abandoned old man, but as the keeper of its history. The person who ensured the truth stayed visible. One afternoon, Walter drove to the Meadowbrook nursing home where Merrick had lived before his arrest. He wasn't sure why he needed to do this, only that he did. The confrontation felt necessary somehow, a way to close the circle. The facility was pleasant, well-maintained, the kind of place powerful people retired to, comfortable and dignified. Walter thought of Harold, who died in a river, and Gerald Simmons, buried in unmarked woods. The injustice of it burned. But Merrick was no longer there. He'd been transferred to the county jail, awaiting trial. The receptionist gave Walter the address, and he drove there instead. The jail allowed him to visit. His role in the case gave him certain privileges. He sat in the visiting room, waiting until guards brought Merrick in. The old man looked diminished now, dressed in an orange jumpsuit, his authority stripped away. They sat across from each other, separated by plexiglass, and Walter picked up the phone. "I wanted to see you," Walter said. "Needed to, I think." Merrick stared at him with those cold blue eyes. "You're the one who found it all. Buckley's insurance policy. I'm the one he left it for. So someone would finish what he started. Congratulations. You destroyed lives, reopened old wounds for what? Justice?" Merrick's voice dripped with contempt. "The men I protected are dead. The crimes are ancient history. All you've done is satisfy your own need to feel important." Walter felt anger rise, but pushed it down. "I gave Harold Buckley a voice after 50 years of silence. I made sure people know he tried to do the right thing, that he mattered. And I proved that truth doesn't die just because powerful men want it buried. Truth." Merrick laughed bitterly. "You're 76 years old, abandoned by your own son, living in a condemned motel. And you lecture me about truth?" "The difference between us," Walter said quietly, "is that I found redemption in my final years. You'll die in prison, remembered only for your crimes. That's the truth that matters." He hung up the phone and walked away, leaving Merrick staring after him. 3 months after Clayton Merrick's confession, the Pineview Motor Lodge looked different. The county's renovation grant had funded essential repairs, a new roof, replaced windows, fresh paint on the exterior. The neon vacancy sign had been restored, though now it read MUSEUM instead, glowing softly in the gathering dusk. Walter stood in the parking lot, watching the sun set behind the building that had become his home. At 77, he felt more alive than he had in years. Purpose had a way of rejuvenating a person, he discovered. When you mattered to something larger than yourself, age became just a number. Inside, room 12 and the hidden apartment beneath it had been preserved exactly as Walter had found them. Visitors could descend those same stairs, see Harold Buckley's desk and journal, understand the courage it had taken to document the truth. A small plaque by the entrance read, "In memory of Harold Buckley, 1929 to 1974. His courage to seek truth reminds us that justice, though delayed, must never be denied." The dedication ceremony was scheduled for this evening. Walter had tried to keep it small, but the story had captured too much attention. Television crews were setting up equipment. State officials had confirmed their attendance. Even the governor had sent a representative. Phyllis arrived first, driving across the highway from her gas station. She looked elegant in a navy dress, her white hair freshly styled. In her hands, she carried the bronze plaque that would be mounted beside Harold's photograph. "Ready for this?" she asked Walter. "As ready as I'll be. Still feels strange, all this attention." "You earned it." "We both did." She looked at the restored building. "Harold would be pleased, I think, knowing his story is finally being told." Eugene arrived next, leaning heavily on a cane but grinning broadly. "Looks good, Walter. Really good." Lorraine pulled up in her car, camera crew following. She'd been covering every development in the story, her newspaper circulation tripling in the past 3 months. "Walter, can we get some footage before the ceremony starts?" He agreed reluctantly, standing in front of room 12 while cameras rolled, explaining how he discovered the crack in the wall that had led to everything else. It still felt surreal, being interviewed, being treated as someone important. At 6 o'clock, the guests began arriving. Townspeople, some who remembered the 1970s and others too young to have lived through them. State officials in expensive suits. Journalists from across the region. They gathered in the parking lot, filling the space that had been empty for so long. The mayor spoke first, offering an official apology for the decades of corruption that had stained the town's history. It was carefully worded, legally vetted, but seemed sincere. The town was trying to reckon with its past, to acknowledge the wrongs that had been buried. Then it was Walter's turn. He approached the microphone set up near room 12, feeling nervous despite having prepared remarks. But when he looked out at the crowd, he forgot his notes and spoke from the heart. 4 months ago, I was abandoned at this motel by my son. I felt forgotten, worthless, like my life no longer mattered to anyone. I spent weeks in despair, wondering why I should keep going. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Then I found a crack in a wall. Behind it was Harold Buckley's hidden apartment. And inside that apartment was proof that one man had tried to stand up for truth, even when it cost him everything. Harold gave me a gift. He gave me purpose. He reminded me that every life has value, that it's never too late to make a difference. That truth matters even when it takes 50 years to emerge. He looked at Phyllis, who stood near the plaque, tears streaming down her face. Harold Buckley was murdered for his courage. He was silenced and forgotten, his sacrifice erased. But today, we remember him. Today we say his name and honor what he tried to do. And we commit to never forgetting again, to never letting power bury truth, to always standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. The crowd applauded. Phyllis came forward, and together they unveiled the bronze plaque. It gleamed in the fading light, permanent and solid, a testament that would outlast all of them. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed and camera crews packed up, Walter's phone rang. Kenny's name appeared on the screen. He answered. "Hello, Kenny." "Dad, I saw the ceremony on the news. You looked good, strong." Kenny's voice was tentative. "I'm 3 months sober now, going to meetings every day. I wanted you to know." "That's good. I'm glad. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I wanted to tell you I'm trying. Really trying this time." Walter looked at the plaque, and Harold's name shining in bronze. "We all make mistakes, Kenny. What matters is whether we learn from them, whether we try to do better." He paused. "I'm not ready for a full reconciliation. The hurt is still too fresh. But maybe we can talk occasionally. Small steps." "Small steps," Kenny agreed, relief evident in his voice. "Thank you, Dad, for giving me a chance." After hanging up, Walter sat on the bench outside room 7, watching the last visitors depart. Phyllis joined him, and they sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and the restored neon sign flickered to life. "Do you think he's at peace now?" Phyllis asked quietly. "Harold, I mean, I'd like to think so. His story is told. Justice was served, as much as it can be after 50 years. That's more than most people get. And what about you?" Are you at peace? Walter considered the question. 4 months ago, he'd have said his life was over, that he was just waiting to die. Now he had work to do, stories to tell, a purpose that extended beyond himself. I am, he said, surprised to realize it was true. I really am. They sat together as night settled over the Pineview Motor Lodge. Two elderly people who'd survived loss and betrayal and found meaning in seeking truth. Above them, the museum sign glowed steady and bright, a beacon promising that some stories, no matter how long buried, will always find their way into the light. Walter pulled Harold's pocket watch from his vest, checking the time. 7:30. The inscription on the back, "To Harold with Love P," caught the light. Time had passed, but some things endured. Love, truth, justice, the determination of ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Walter smiled and put the watch away. Tomorrow he'd give his first tour of the museum, sharing Harold's story with visitors. There was work to do, purpose to fulfill, life still to be lived. And that, he thought, was enough.